The active compound in marijuana, THC, actually interferes with the reproductive system. Welcome to the Wisdom of the Body podcast. I'm your host, Heather Grzych. Here, we talk about the profound connection between mind, body, and spirit. Join me and other authors, wellness experts, and everyday individuals talk about the importance of listening to our bodies, trusting our guts, and living in deeper harmony with nature. So, whether you're seeking guidance on your wellness journey or simply looking for inspiration, you're in the right place. We're thrilled to be in the top 3% of podcasts globally. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and most other places where people listen to podcasts. You can follow by joining my email list at heathergrzych.com or by following me on Instagram at Heather Grzych. That's Heather, Grzych. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. I'm Heather Grzych, and welcome to the Wisdom of the Body. Today, we're diving into a topic in holistic healthcare that stirs up all kinds of feelings, everything from rebellion to ritual to healing and even to hiding, because we're going to talk about cannabis, marijuana, weed. Now, it's not my goal to cover everything here, everything there is about this topic, because there's actually a lot to cover, but I want to discuss two important aspects of it. One, how it intersects with fertility, and two, longevity. Because while cannabis is being celebrated in wellness spaces and legalized across the country, we're actually not asking enough questions. We know how it makes us feel, but we're not asking if it's actually good for our specific body type, or our life circumstance, or our age, or if we're overusing it. And we're not being curious about how it affects our fertility and our bodies as we age. So today, we're going to talk about that. First, I want to say that while I studied herbal medicine for years and I teach people how to use herbs safely and effectively, the plants, Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, are actually ones that are outside of my focus as an Ayurvedic practitioner. Therefore, I don't recommend them to people in my practice. But through the years, I've had quite a few clients who use it medicinally, and I have had no choice but to understand how it's affecting them physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I don't just assume that just because it's a plant, that it's good for everyone to take it. I hear people say that about cannabis, but it's really not true in the same way that a tomato is going to mix well with some people's bodies, while it doesn't with other people's bodies. In Ayurveda, we tend to not look at substances as good or bad, like this is a good substance and this is a bad substance, but it's more about whether it's going to be beneficial in a given circumstance or not. And while it can feel very liberating that so many more people have access to marijuana now, or cannabis, whatever you want to call it, and people don't have to fear that they're going to get arrested for eating a gummy because they want to chill out on the couch on a Friday night, the removal of these barriers and the widespread use of this particular plant are also allowing people to study some of the negative effects of the improper use of this plant. So let's begin with fertility. As an author of a fertility book, so I wrote a book called The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, I have worked with people who are doing everything right for their fertility. So they're charting cycles, they're checking their hormone levels, they're eating organic, they're meditating daily, and yet their reproductive health or even having a child can sometimes be a problem for them. And one thing I sometimes find is that they're using cannabis. Sometimes it's for anxiety, sometimes it's for sleep, and sometimes as a coping tool for the stress of all the things that life throws at us. And I get it. I truly do. I'm not saying my life is any easier than anybody else's. Life can be very overwhelming. There are many challenges in the world that can be devastating. And cannabis oftentimes provides people with a moment of peace. But here's the truth that we need to sit with. The active compound in marijuana, THC, actually interferes with the reproductive system. It has an effect on the reproductive system. It binds to receptors in the brain, the testes, the ovaries, and the uterus. And it disrupts normal hormonal rhythms that govern ovulation and sperm production. It can slow sperm down. It can make cycles more irregular. It can affect ejaculation, and it affects both sexes. And it can actually interfere with implantation, with conception, and even the epigenetic expression of your future child. And this is not opinion, it's science. And it's something that Ayurveda understood in a very different way thousands of years ago. Because in Ayurveda, fertility depends on this concept of ojas. So ojas is like your life sap, your resilience, your vital essence. Some people refer to it as your immunity. And it's what makes you fertile in every sense. So fertile with ideas, with emotions, with energy, and with life. And it protects your tissues and it makes you resilient. Your ojas is impacted by how you live, what you consume, your life energy, and even what you're surrounded by. And so the parts of the cannabis plants that most people consume, especially when used regularly, they will dry and deplete this ojas if used in excess. That can increase your vata, so the air and the space elements. It can scatter the mind. It can dull the mind. It can have different effects. And it can overstimulate the nervous system. So instead of building this quality of clarity and groundedness, it can actually increase restlessness and the unrooted fire of constant stimulation. So it may seem like it's chilling us out, but it actually does much more than we think because it also has heating properties. And that's helpful to know if somebody's struggling with inflammation issues or increased pitta dosha. One of my very well-respected Ayurvedic herbal medicine textbooks for my master's program in Ayurveda refers to this herb called bhang or ganja, and it describes the medicinal properties of the herb. So it's an appetizer, meaning that increases your hunger. And anybody who's ever had the munchies can attest to that. The textbook also says that it's an aphrodisiac. So perhaps it could be useful to people who want to conceive a kid naturally, but might need a little bit of help getting it on. But even this textbook says that it's highly addictive. And I remember people saying years ago, even from like my teenage years, when people first started experimenting with it, oh, marijuana is not addictive. But some research today, now that it's been studied because it's been legally used in so many places, some of the research today suggests that 3 out of 10 people will develop cannabis use disorder. So this belief that it's not addictive is actually not true for some people. And it does other things to people. This Ayurvedic herbal medicine textbook also says that it's an anticonvulsant, that it's a cholagogue, which is something that increases bile from the liver and the gallbladder into the duodenum, which is the beginning part of your small intestine, which is part of your digestive tract. So it could actually impact your digestion and your bowel patterns. This particular herb is described as astringent, which tightens tissues, and also a substance that can increase your pulse rate at first, and then it can slow your pulse rate later. So it can actually affect your heart rate. And it's also described as something that's hemostatic, meaning that it can control or stop bleeding. So there's this word in Sanskrit that we use called stambana. So it can have like a stopping effect on the blood and bleeding. And interestingly, also, analgesic or pain relieving, which a lot of people will use cannabis or CBD products for. And another quality of it is that it's oxytocic. So you might be familiar with the word oxytocin. An oxytocic substance or herb means it can increase sexual arousal and ejaculatory power, but in the female, it can actually contract the female's uterus. And you want to really know the right time for that, because that's something you want to be very careful about during early pregnancy. You don't want to be going around contracting uteruses when there's a small embryo trying to implant in a tissue, right? You don't want to interfere with that process. You could also argue that extra contraction when a woman is having menstrual cramps could also somehow interfere with that process. And it's not that cannabis is evil. In fact, in very rare and specific Ayurvedic formulations of herbs, these ancient Ayurvedic physicians from the Indian subcontinent used it, but only with this precise balance and purification and purpose, right? Like what we're doing in today's modern culture is not that. Like it's used more like we just drink alcohol recreationally. It's not always treated medicinally, even though it's prescribed, or in some ways, the intention when you go and buy it is like, I'm buying it for this purpose, but we may not be consuming it very intentionally. So we're recreationally impacting, in some cases, weakening the very tissues that build life. And like many medicinal herbs that we're using today, we actually don't know the full effects of these substances on our bodies and our minds, because today, such knowledge of the medicinal use of plants has been lost from our modern society. And that's why a lot of us turn to Ayurveda and to other types of traditional medicine, because we wanted to try to rebuild this understanding. So if you're having any sort of challenge with reproductive health and fertility, it's definitely time to look at whether getting off cannabis is a good idea for you, or maybe even taking it, depending on what's happening with you. So if you do get pregnant, say you get pregnant and you use cannabis during the pregnancy, I already mentioned the risk of like early pregnancy and contractions, but there's actually research that shows that there's a much higher likelihood that you'll be anemic and your baby will be born with low birth weight. So the American Heart Association has reported that before. Okay, so now let's talk about longevity. First, I want you to think about all the people in your life over the age of 65. And think especially of the people who are like in their 80s or 90s. Are they using cannabis? No. Apparently, more people over 65 are using cannabis these days, mostly medicinally for pain or sleep or mental health. But most people over this age are also on a bunch of other medications, and it can get complicated and sometimes even dangerous to use all these drugs together. Cannabis is often framed as a natural medicine or a natural alternative. And yes, plants are definitely powerful healers. They can be, but they can also have side effects. And longevity is not just about surviving longer. When we're talking about longevity, it's not just about surviving. It's about like how well we live, how robust we stay in our tissues and our minds, and how deeply we embody this clarity over comfort. So there may actually be a better plant or a better substance to help us. And I think it's really cool when people get interested in plants in general, even if it's marijuana, because it could make them curious about other plants that exist that could help them. So as with any substance, you want to ask yourself, is this substance helping me live well today and also tomorrow, right? Because there may be like a short-term effect, but then there's another effect tomorrow when you wake up in the morning, or another effect 2 days from now, or 1 week from now, or later in the cycle, or something like that. So you want to think short-term and long-term when you take these types of substances. In Ayurveda, longevity is built on daily rhythms, wise energy use, purity of your thought, your action, and your intent, and skillfully using substances to modulate different effects on a day-to-day basis. And if we're looking for this kind of purity and this clarity, cannabis sometimes can cloud that for people. And it may be a relief in the short term, but it can be a fog over time. So depending on what your particular situation is, your mental health situation, you might want to think about that. But this mental effect is actually not even the most concerning issue when using cannabis into older ages. So remember what that Ayurvedic textbook said about cannabis, that it can affect your heart rate or the quality of your blood, right? It's like hemostatic. The performance of your nervous system and your ojas, your vital essence. It can affect all these things. And I'm going to assume that you know whether or not the munchies are good for you, because cannabis is going to increase that. Maybe it's helpful for people that have no appetite, but not for those of us who have no problem with the munchies or eating regularly. And if we don't eat properly, that's going to affect our digestion. It's going to affect our metabolism, how our tissues get formed, how liquids and energy flow through our bodies, and it's even going to affect our moods. So it's not just about whether, when consuming this particular substance, it's not just about whether you're smoking it and your lungs might get affected from the smoke. although there is a lot of research that smoking it is likely worse for you than eating it for your tissues. But there's also now research that shows that people who use cannabis in various forms actually have a higher risk of cardiovascular problems. And it makes sense that that would be the case if it can affect your heart rate, your nervous system, the quality of your blood, doesn't it? So back to fertility for a second, considering that so many people are having kids at older ages and that cardiovascular issues also tend to increase as one ages, I think it's very important for those who are older to really think about whether cannabis use is the best choice for them if they're thinking about having a baby, especially whether that's the best choice for them and their potential future baby. Okay, I know this is definitely a sensitive topic, and I've only just covered a few aspects of it. For some, it can be very personal. I've actually had clients who are addicted to marijuana, to cannabis, and some who've admitted it and some who haven't. And people might be using it because they've tried everything else or because they think it's a better alternative to doing some other drug, whether it's herbal or synthetic. And they might be doing it because their anxiety feels unmanageable or because they feel like this journey is crushing their spirit, right? Life is hard for a lot of people, but there are other ways to overcome such challenges. And there are other ways to feel better and deeper ways to nourish one's body and one's nervous system without compromising a person's vitality. But change is hard. I get it. So, for example, if it's anxiety, you could start with warm food. With oil massage is another thing that we use in Ayurveda to really calm a body or calm a nervous system, or even with better sleep hygiene. That's another thing that can really be helpful for anxiety, or with gentle herbs, ones that have fewer strong effects on some of these systems, like lemon balm or even ashwagandha. Although you also want to know if you're using those herbs in the right circumstance, but those are some examples of herbs that can also curb anxiety. And if you start with the belief that people don't have to numb out to feel whole, that you can change your state without numbing out, and you look for that state, I think that's really super cool. I'm not saying that people need to never have cannabis. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying people shouldn't have it, but I'm hoping that you've started to think about whether it's the right substance at the right time, because people really just need the right support at the right time and the right rhythm. So thanks for listening. Stay curious, stay vital, and most of all, listen to the wisdom of the body. Thank you for dropping in today. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a rating. To learn more about the topics shared on this podcast, visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on the Wisdom of the Body.